their humanity. There's a difference between internation relations and internation correlation. We have not been led to realize this. There are proofs that is this because of criminally legalized criminal persuasions in relationship to an archetypal criminal enterprise. I'm not a lawyer, not a police. I'm not a criminal. This is in relationship to religion. In other words, there are proofs with this that not one nation is not for. In other words, every nation was only let realized. What's that mean? Criminally legalized criminal persuasions. In other words, every nation was only let realized to roles justifying shared means to lie. And with this, only let realized with conviction natures attached to what the Quran is saying about justice, for example, and what the Old Testament, for example, is saying about with cipher. The Old Testament is with cipher and relating to algebra that the Quran helps save too. No, the messenger, Hamdallah, thank God, thank Allah. What is the difference between God and Allah? God is our conception of our head, progressively understanding more Allah or understanding less, in demonstration of the of unchanging Allah, unchanging positive. Why name it Allah? This is in relationship because for science with correlation, you have to have values. So we have value A, value B, value C, value D, value E. In other words, and what this is tied to too is it proves that the landscape was tactically denatured. No one realizes it in relationship to what forced hundreds of nations to shared policing nature, and with that sanctions threats and the linguistic threats in relationship to mass expertly only let realized necessary and not realized how, because this is a method that was set up before all semi-ancient nations. So all modern nations wouldn't even realize it. Even kings and queens stay stored. Even the body of Saudi Arabia, because of the convictions that we're attaching, we're not letting the sequence nature of it demonstrate. We must understand the the, the, the conversation in the beginning of the Quran, where the Quran is telling the person of faith too to value the unbeliever who's not with the criminal insidiousness, not using those words, but in other words, saying these people are going to say they're Muslims all way, but they're not. Now this isn't to attack individuals the way it's presented. It's not only in relationship to the defense of the body of Saudi Arabia and to the body of the Quran distinctly, because this is the way. This is in relationship to the nature that is inherent. Why are we all a species too? Because this is for correlation. We're supposed to understand correlation is, in other words, you could see what is true always and what is not. So what if, for example, with the Old Testament, if we apply faith to the tree of life and to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and say this is cipher, so what is this cipher trying to say? And we say what is true that is not that, what is not the tree of life, but still that value besides faith, which is correlation. Correlation is a value why, unchanging to everybody. Same thing, the reason why we're a species, three ways. The nature of the Trinity is in demonstration to us, always, and has a relationship to unchanging value. And all other values have a value-nature relationship. but as values in demonstration of the unchanging Allah. English was revealed, there are proofs to teach this. In other words, but then being criminally engineered, with England having played roles saving it, because religion took multi-front counters to what criminally re-engineered ancient internation relations. In other words, internation correlation, claiming it to internation relations with a method of linguistic sabotage tied to legal sabotage and negative value nature progressions and terrors that no one has words to counter. And in other words, that are not retreat nature and necessary in relationship to top down and to complex time, too time consuming to address with mass impositions on leaders at the same time, not by accident, natures of nations forced to the negative value nature progressions as physical delusions and as shared means to lie, and then these are the convictions that are being attached to the Quran, which is, which both sides, all sides, hundreds of nations were playing a game where linguistics are only let because everyone's hurt constantly. Everyone's not let free speech, only to expression, as they say. Free speech is different. And see, this is why we need outside, in other words, we need 4 different facts treatments that are incapable of the surface value top-down lies and delusions juxtaposed to business narratives and to narratives of stability in relationship to the nature of progressions with to claim stability. And they're only doing that through relations contrast, as we're just one negative value nature progression with a whole bunch of them next to it. Everyone sharing means to lie. That's what it is, because in other words, not lie like that, like lie in relationship to the top-down impositions of the nature that force share policing and natures of impositions upon the leaders, for example, of Saudi Arabia, and not just my nation, not just all nations, especially, desert denatured nations. This is unnatural. This was to effect what was perpetuated to be blamed on other lies and delusions, to have that perpetually measured. In other words, with other very evil evidence fabrication natures to all areas. That's what they did with intercultural policing natures who were only realized to roles with it, them not understanding with colonization's terror laws here. It wasn't just England that was entrenched here. It was other nations. So England was our ally, but no nation was able to be honest or to be moral, because there was war going on, but not by accident. This was a game to play, only let realized reaction nature, relying upon, evidence fabrication nature, hurt conviction nature, mass indifference engineering nations, and treatments of, and fact treatments in relationship to morality, only let realized, forced, even glorified, incomplete legal definitions are wrong, and predatory litigation justifications. That's why we lost the war on poverty. I'm not even a lawyer. That's why our nations can only define these impositions by claiming others' enemies without understanding what they can't describe with their own nations. Because we're blaming it on, in other words, this is a linguistic trick too, because everyone's trying self-defense nature. This is what the trick was to do, to have the nations only let realized self-defending what is indefensible at complex litigation levels that our most sophisticated can't believe that we could understand, because they're the only ones that understand it. The only reason they're the only ones that stand is because it's not honest. It can't be in relationship to the nasty stuff it's with, and it's not natural. This is with a method to the exploitation of all ages of innocence. In other words, because it was here before education, and so even this is why we have politics with our nations that put business, they put physics, they put relations of pseudo identities and top-down lies, forcing finite to scholarship. For example, with the Quran, and not to the actual conversation, which I'm trying to do here, which is like these people are going to say this always, but they're not that. In other words, we're supposed to be able to use correlation too, because our leaders don't have free speech in relationship to being forced to share policing of forced market positions in the forced commodity landscapes for shared police. That's why we lost the war on poverty, because we don't have we're in a linguistic trap. All nations, and see, that's where, especially, we have to understand how the world was denatured to force everyone into these unnatural into progressions and denatured understandings of human education, what it needs, and not realizing methods to the exploitation of all areas of innocence, to all space area. This is a space. English is about space values and about space value nature. There's words, there are phrases, and there are clauses. There's independent natures of clauses. There's only independent nature of clause, which is a subject connected to a main verb. And then there are independent natures. I mean, there are subordinate natures of clauses, like adverbial. If it has a main verb and a subject, then it's a main verb. If it's a complete thought, if it's unfinished, then it's a subordinated clause. If it doesn't have a main verb connected to the nature of it. In other words, the reason I'm saying this is because this is about the nature of values and the nature of value of nature relationships. So in other words, the tree of life is a value. It's a nature of value distinct from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which in the story in the Old Testament, Adam and Eve were not supposed to eat from it. Now there are proofs that Adam used to stand for the subject and Eve used to stand for the verb. In relationship to teaching, in other words, Eve stands for energies, victory energy. Energies, victory energizes is Eve. Energies, victory energizes. But why? What's that mean? In other words, when a main verb is not used as a main verb, then we inflect it. For example, if we put an ing on a main verb, it becomes a noun. Run is a verb. If you go running, now it's a noun. You could use it adverbally, but that's nothing. In other words, this is a very simple language, but it's obfuscated because there's a nature of correlation method, not just with it because we have a correlative conjunction. We are a correlation nature with two polarities, alpha and the omega, within the greater Earth's value, yin yang. Why? Because there's always value. In other words, we're with a nature that is greater than us that is expanding through diffusion, through coming through Earth. This is how the ancients was criminally re-engineered to be exploited, which is ancient revelations. This is demonstrably what the religions had to go multi-front counter to, which was what took over, which used all kinds of evil in theater to retreat people from, without even realizing, from the necessities of education. You know, categorically self-entertaining people to roles, sharing lies and methods to them, perpetually exploiting what is needed for correlation, which is why we're a species, to realize positive value in a relationship to unchanging positive. In other words, so we can correlate what causes positive value nature progressions and what causes negative value nature progressions. So the landscapes of the world were denatured. And this is affecting Syria. This is affecting Iraq. This is affecting Yemen, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Africa. And no one understands because everyone's playing through nations, pseudo-identities, relations. In other words, with language of the law. Only as justifications of, as predatory litigation natures. As shared liars, shared moral, hurt evidence fabric, not real, as victims to all areas, to methods to stay the exploitations, the awes, and to stay hurt conviction natures, and to stay hurt on all areas. Stay means to it's right there and active, not by accident. In other words, this is what the terror laws with color, for example, were with methods and natures of organized crime that not by accident our nations failed to explain. They blamed it on color and teach everyone, because this was with the narratives, with the intercultural agencies and police natures only let realized to roles with that. And then self-defense natures as that in relationship to what the devil is. In other words, an archetypal organized crime that organized juxtapositions of self-defense natures perpetually reliant upon it in relationship to evidence fabrication needs, lie progression needs, with our top-down agencies in relationship to what stayed tall areas first, a method that they the self-defending, the same self-extorting method. And we have no words for it because we're forced surface think. We're forced expert lean. And this is multi-front on linguistic fields. And it's with insidiousness, criminal insidiousness caused by criminal enterprises. For example, if you have an internation criminal enterprise, it's going to create criminal insidiousness nature. For example, like wrongdoers and predicate act criminals, because it's going to create needs to cover over lie progressions. In other words, have lie progressions blamed on other things to protect the associate criminals of the archetypal criminal enterprise. And of the layers of criminal enterprise is shared by modern nations and by natures of shared nature in that, to stewardships in that. This is not the law that the religions say to fight for. These are the religions this is the nature that religions say to fight for, to defend the bodies of nations. But they're also saying if we don't defend the nature first, in other words, the reason metaphysical truth is unchanging positive is a sequence nature. And in sequence, next after that comes metaphysics, comes the body of the nature that's diffusing through us. and as us, as our identity, the other body. The identity is the body of value that is unchanging, that is true all the way. In other words, and now what is the body that is unchanging with faith, between faith? In other words, this is about yin yang too. Yin yang is the feminine. Another thing about, in other words, this is to show three natures as one body. In other words, one as, one longing to, and one longing way as the same positive value nature progression, where that's only positive to itself. Where the black and white is working together as one, increasing the value of the little part, black and white parts inside. And that's positive values stay here, for example. And that's when that is when that is stayed here, then we have value ah, which is value ah, inherent. We can, or in other words, we connect with it, which makes the connection of our nature being greater. That's what causes the evolution, and then it just keeps getting greater because that's correlation does. But we have a method that had us realized only inclinations that are self-defense natures in relationships to linguistics fields, relying upon expertly in database relationships. Colonization was with terror database relationships before there were kings and queens, and since semi-ancient times. They were more sophisticated demonstrably than, in other words, it's a big difference with machines. And just because they didn't have mass engineering, didn't mean they didn't have inventions like this is. Anyway, so the alpha and the omega, value Y, we'll learn this. But what I'm trying to say is, in other words, look at the potentials. If we could just understand, like with an anime, in other words, understand that the nature we're in that facts treatments are with so many top-down lies. And all that's connected to. See, people don't see that, and not by accident. When people make opinions, they're all shaped to try to feel out, to learn from experts with natures and methods of, exploitation of the innocence of all ages. Not by accident, since before our nation's founding, in other words. But the answer is right there, the one that not let tried, and no one could even realize it, and they don't want it to, they can't let us see it because then they change. People will get caught with roles having covered up live progressions. Our top people for motivations that everyone missed, because we're not letting. Because we're defending that as the identity of nations, not the identity of the body of our body, a species together. That's why we will go right to Israel, Palestine, and help Iraq and Syria with what? Obviously, with a method that turns negatives into positives. We have all these, in other words, organize ourselves there and monetize it. Give them a means to where the landscape's going to share progressive value, and then make it so better than the standards they put our homes and stuff now. With colonization's terror laws before we even had cars. Per method to have denatured landscape, causing negative value nature progression, blamed on lies and delusions. Excuse me. And that measure exploited. And per methods, maintaining terror state to all areas caused blamed on other things, on each other. we're divided, and divided from, like, when they have these problems with the police. This is in relationship to terror methods. Think about that. The sick. It's not to go say, oh, it's the sick, and go after the physical people or the actors of it. It's to go after with the liars of the theater of it. That was the tactic of it, of terror laws like this, which were against white people too. The slavery is in all these nations because of the internation police locked everyone into hate and to self-defense nature of logic incapable of letting ratiocination defend it too after with industries and methods only let realized natures of business and natures of psychology and of logic reliant upon the same shared needs to lie. That's why we have these problems with the politics and with the treatments of the facts, with the treatments people can't make police reports. That's why there's so many gun shootings. Before it's because there's no honesty, and it's not just because there's no honesty. Because to all areas, intercity, there are methods at play here. There are evidence fabrication motivations, lie progression cover-up methods, not by accident. So in other words, I'll donate all kinds of ideas, and then in other words, what is the idea is to make paradise. That's what every religion prays for. You know what I mean? And that's why the Quran gives a person the right to not pray in a mosque if they see any reason, if they see any reason to not to, right before any of the controversial parts of the Quran. This is in relationship to the conversation is about demonstrating what's intonation. Obviously, this is the problem. This is the problem with intonation, but not from the source of one, and not from the source of a unity of them. But in between our legal natures natures relied on in relationship to wars and terrors, with unrealized roles, to nature's justifications, and acts with, natures of evidence fabrication cover-ups, and with breaching cover-ups shared by our nations. So these people that make war at the same time, with more evil than what they're going after, and which is when it only gets like this because everybody, in other words, in this conversation, before modern nations, there's a method to hurt everybody and to exploit interscience roles, obfuscating themselves, obfuscating truth, enforcing a glorified fake sciences in relationship to only let realized predatory litigation natures as the branches of government. That's why they had witch trials. That's why they had. In other words, this is also multi-front methods that are methodical, with a method of organized crime and the natures of organized crime that we don't understand, not by accident, because they didn't let it. In other words, they only let other self-defending, only let that realized, not by accident. So the thing to do is not to go after people, but to go after what's not true always. What is not positive always. In other words, to the species, to the man and to the woman, it is not positive. And not only is it not positive, defending it as a positive is a linguistic weapon in relationship to methods with this, to all areas, with sensibilities. And then when they do, for example, even letting them do social experiments and stuff like that, and the natures of the things that um, our nations get involved with, our police forms. It's in other words, it's not natural, but per criminally legalized criminal persuasion since semi-ancient times, and then only let realized with modern times. So as important as it is to understand the natures of organized crime that were first glorified with our nation's foundings, per the sciences that were peripheral to what was there before them, and with and as them, but no one understanding it. Only understanding terror, and which is the method to only let everyone justify or conviction. That's why no one explains, no one looks and says, "Look at the God, look, there's no, it's all like desert. There's nothing grows. There's no water." You know what I mean? The further you go away from the earth, the further the way the heat waves go, and it's not collecting. It goes faster away, and then condensation comes too, and it gets colder, and water comes down. So there, in other words, with the pyramids, there are proofs that they're trying to build back a mountain that was dismantled. And then what happens if you dismantle a mountain? You dismantle the water. In other words, the river. And so that's where the Sahara came from. And see, then you go online and people put pictures that have a picture and they say it's not next to the Sahara. You know, they tell those lies and stuff like that because people have motivations to keep the physical delusions going in relationship to the kind of lies that need to be standardized for all kinds of shared natures of justifications of lies with all areas in relationship to litigation points with courts that no one realizes how they're sabotaged, their treatments, no one realizing it, because no one realizing the sequence nature of truth first, and no one realizing what I call algebraic consciousness, which is correlation, which is seeking to understand what is the sabotage of nature inherent to consciousness. Not one person can look. I beg the nations too to look at urban poverty and you know, suburban and standards denatured. Everyone who hanging on in relationship to differential value nature systems and needs for the treatment of logic. I mean, for the treatment of facts. Facts treatment is different too, not by accident. You know what I'm saying? In other words, this is also exploiting us if we get mixed between areas, and then they want that blamed on prejudice. They need that game because they need to perpetually obfuscate what's actively exploiting poverty between the suburbs next to it too, exploiting the suburbs as well actively, but more insidiously. I mean, but just as insidiously, but not to you know, on the better end of the half going down together. You know what I'm saying? And it's not because of a person's fault. It's because of the sciences, and it's not just because of the sciences. It's because the only let realized self-defended predatory litigation natures, and you know, in relationship to our that being us too, even non-lawyers, only let realized predatory litigation natures. You know, ill street prosecutors, but not the good ill. See, we have to, you know what I mean, with the slang is ill is good, but this is we have hurt conviction natures not by accident. We have hurt. Of course, those people in
with no food like that and on systems like that, you know what I mean? And with human standards justified called stability in business like this with God, with nuclear, all that money wasted on nuclear bombs, that's because and nothing to counter it with actual morality, with honesty, nothing to counter it with trying to connect our nations with things not motivated by that, in self defense of that nature, exploitations of that to all areas. See, because these are unchecked natures of police because they have nothing to do. In other words, they're beyond our own, but they're juxtaposed with making exploitations of our police internal investigations. And the nature of them, because they're not supposed to talk about this, but this is all through time. So then everyone sharing needs to cover up live progressions in relationship to only realize standard nature, the methods of doing that, natures of treatment of morality, fact treatments, putting business before the Constitution. That's what they did. That's what they did. Made everyone indifference to this, not by accident. They made an engineering of indifferences with linguistical facts treatments, and to stay methods unrealized, blamed on other lies and delusions. To all areas, exploitations of all agents of innocence consciously and beyond the discernment of everybody, even our most sophisticated, who end up needing to cover up live progressions in relationship to the worst natures of crime with other forms of police together, with roles of systemic 9/11 connected evidence fabrications, witness fabrications, 9/11 contest witness fabrications, categorically forging names, all in charge. But because they know they also have a method of not allowing police reports. Well, anyways, this is by shared internation police. See, this nation was forced, not only terrorized by other nations, but by the terror database system, terror database laws, terror prison system, terror inter-science system that had the evidence fabrication methods to only let realize self-defended evidence fabrication natures, hurt conviction natures, and indifference natures, sharing means to get away with lies, and to do it to be directed to it by police forms of motivations for it that no one realizes, and murderously with all our nations. This is disgusting with wars and stuff, with the solutions, because they have no solution, because it's everyone's the victim, because the sciences put business before, put physics before metaphysics, and that's what religion's about. Don't ever put unchanging truth out of sequence. Then it's not unchanging truth now anymore. Then you can't correlate. Then you're not correlating. Then you're negative value nature progression causing it. That's the real cause of environmental problems. It's a method of demonstration to us, but we stay at Leith of Hadith. That's the bottom of the Z. Goodbye. Our value goes. The diffusion. It doesn't stay here. It doesn't stay within the range, and then the unchanging positive will not go beyond as it's coming through temporary space nature. Then what it stays is negative value nature, complete memory of in relationship to positive value nature progression somewhere else. This is what the ancients taught. This is not what the Quran says, but the Quran is about saving algebra. And Allah's name, with English too, it's also about law, but not with the hurt conviction nature, reaction natures. We have to speak for the body of the species to speak for the Quran. not just for, and as with that, we have to speak for the body of Saudi Arabia and of our nation, whatever nation we're from. In other words, why do we have to do that? Why do we have to speak for the body of Saudi Arabia too? Because of the nature of forced shared policing, criminally forced shared market position, criminally forced overextended nations, criminally forced time imposition, hundreds of nations sharing policing of what was forced with terror, in Oz, and business, and only let, scientists with roles obfuscating reality with physical delusions, and with this being actively exploited for all kinds of uncharged natures of organized crime and life progression methods, evidence fabrication methods. I'm not a lawyer. The only way is to put, in other words, look at, if we understand right now that we need to change, we understand, we think as one body. In other words, as a species, what is positive to it all ways? And what does it want? What does everybody want? Which is something really that feels good. Well, yeah, but it stays progressive value, so it stays progressively good. The only thing that does that is if we make the water come there, and not to these cheap colonial trick, denatured landscapes, as the native dreams of America. You can't even the negotiations of business and the relations that they force are to justification, sharing, lying, evidence as shared as evidence fabrication natures, saying, oh, that's just the way things are. You know what I mean? Not by accident. We have to change the entire human value nature system. So we should just start where of course, Africa too, but the only problem in Africa is legal nature. It's predatory litigation nature. It's vision. Because if you don't, in other words, it's self-defense nature of pseudo-identities, of discorrelation. In other words, every nation sharing this. We're not letting the body of the species correlate what is only inherent to all temporary value natures, is the unchanging space nature positive identity, Allah. We want to fall within that range. And then what stays that nature going out of us, it stays that, and then it stays that progressively. So they call this heaven. In other words, because if you're positive value nature, Allah's nature overall is of progressive value to itself. In other words, our consciousness, our identity, is its memory complete, and it's its perfection. You know what I mean? It's space nature is one body, has one identity, has one unchanging nature of positive, and that's discernible through correlation as a radical that is cause to and as evolution's cause. We know evolution is a reality. We just don't know the extent of it. But we can see that we can observe the extent of it more and more through correlation. With this, we can also observe needs to sabotage correlations, progression, which is ratiocination nations. So, in other words, all we need is put name down and make a business and make a plan to like. They said there's slim to none, for example, in Iraq afterwards, if there's something for people to be able to get along. If you make a plan where we can bring hundreds of nations, we can put movies, all kinds of things at once we could do, instead of making war progressions, waste money on what kills us. And what causes needs for it, and what doesn't have litigation honesty or the legal nature honesty to counter it with making connections that are real, unchanging, positive always, which not one nation is. Not by accident, because they're forced to terror foundations, forced to share agreements and treatments of morality and of facts that are no good. They're not defensible, but with lies and delusions. So it's a nature that has to keep politics with top-down lies. And incapable, as Oz only let realized, trained by the sciences, not by accident, to industry expert leans in relationship to these things, not real facts. So free speech is. So in other words, if we have everyone on the same page and we have a business that the landscape owns, and then that keeps getting packed with value, and that you build homes for free is garbage. These nations will be denatured to force us to these because imagine the time impositions on nations of leaders with hundreds of shared nations and sharing predatory litigation natures only let realize justify. Imagine, so we don't, in other words, we can reach out to each other as a species. You know what I'm saying? We could, but we can't do it unless the militaries can admit, they didn't understand their enemy, and they were led by the same tricks that led, in other words, I'm not going to blame it on European nations. But it was their litigation nature's faults. In other words, too, putting Oz in there, because that's exactly what we need to explain. That was the term Oz, is to explain the nature of organized crime. For example, not let understood with colonization's terror laws, and with insidious games, actively exploiting people left forsaken by the American Revolution, since the American Civil War. Women couldn't even vote till the 20th century. All kind of sick, not worse than sick. I mean, don't make it personal. This is about legal, so it's about methodically breaching nature laws. That's what they were. They were internation methods of having their life progressions blamed on everything else but themselves. So they made terror laws. In other words, make this person, because call them black, and make them go here. And you're going to make problems. In other words, you're continuing breaching army method tactics that were here since before colonization, and since colonization was here before us. Madison just dropped off. Marbury versus Madison. He was forced to political theater. We have proofs of it. They're not realized because we lost on fronts that in relationship to Madison's plan was a phenomenon, and the only reason that enabled it is because we were the last to fall, and the nature of their manipulations of Native American, though everyone mixing everyone to narratives as evidence fabrication nature is not realized as tool, being blaming roles, blaming breaching methods, caused evils, and roles with crimes in all areas, blamed on other things and blamed on each other. So then we're justifying and not relying upon predatory litigation nature, justifications, and progressions. So that's why religions are about, that's why the Old Testament starts about a garden, but the garden not let anymore. In other words, where did all these species come from? They weren't called, you know what I mean? there are three relationships between us and unchanging positive.